Do you believe that someone who has already left can come back just to give you a mission? I didn't believe it either. Until that day, everything seemed normal. The silence of the early morning, the soft sound of the fan, the sleeping house, and then something changed. A presence took over the room, and before I could understand what was happening, he was there, my father. The same serene gaze, the same firm countenance that I knew so well, but there was something different about him, something profound that transcended logic, time, and even death itself. It may sound crazy. Maybe you think it was just a dream or imagination, but when you feel with every fiber of your body that that person was really there, you can't ignore it. Have you ever experienced something like this? A feeling so real, so alive, that it didn't seem to fit in this world? At that moment, my heart raced. I wanted to speak, but I couldn't. He just looked at me with a peace that disarmed any fear and said, "Now it's up to you. Take care of the family." These words echo within me to this day, as if they carried a sacred code, a key to something much greater than I could comprehend at that moment. Since then, my life has never been the same. I began to notice spiritual signs everywhere, little details, coincidences that didn't seem like coincidences at all. And the more I opened myself to this, the clearer everything became. If you've ever lost someone you love deeply, you know how much absence can hurt. But what if that absence is just part of the story? What if those we love are still around, trying to guide us in ways we can't always understand? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover now may surprise you and perhaps even help you see a new meaning in everything you've ever experienced. This is one of those stories that cannot be explained in words. They are felt, and it all started that night, when my father came back. My father was always the kind of person who, even when silent, filled the room. He didn't need to say much. The way he looked, listened, and was present said more than any speech. He was the pillar of our home, you know? The reference of stability, security, and direction. When he left, it was as if the ground had fallen out from under our feet. I remember the emptiness in my mother's eyes, the silence that filled our breakfast, the little things in our daily lives that suddenly seemed out of place. Nothing was the same. And no matter how much life goes on, because it does, even when we're not ready yet, there is a type of absence that remains present. A living absence. Like a light shadow that walks beside us, reminding us all the time of what once was and will never be the same again. For a long time, I tried to be strong. I put on a mask of everything is fine so that others wouldn't worry. But inside, there were questions that no one could answer. Where is he now? Does he see what we're going through? Does he still somehow care about us? I know these questions aren't just mine. Many people who have lost someone important also carry this mix of longing and hope. And it's in this space between pain and faith that inexplicable things start to happen. Subtle signs, strange sensations, a familiar smell in the middle of the afternoon, a dream so real that it makes you wake up crying, an insistent thought that comes out of nowhere but brings exactly the comfort you needed. My journey really began when I stopped trying to rationalize everything. That's when I understood that there is more behind the scenes of life than we imagine. There is an invisible field where connections do not die, where love is not interrupted by death, only transformed. And it is in this space that, one day, my father returned. But what surprised me most about that visit was not just his presence. It was the weight of the mission he gave me. When he said, "Take care of the family," it pierced my soul as if it carried 1,000 hidden meanings. It was not just a request. It was a transfer of purpose, a spiritual responsibility. I started to look at my life with different eyes. My decisions took on a different meaning. They were no longer just about me. They were about legacy, about keeping alive an emotional and spiritual structure that he built with such dedication. And this changed everything inside me. The way I saw time, my priorities, even the way I viewed my own identity. Sometimes, we need to lose our footing to understand where our feet really are. And in this process, I began to realize that certain pains come with revelations, hidden truths that we can only access when we stop resisting the invisible. They are not ready-made answers, but perceptions that arise from silence, from deep feeling, from being fully there, available for something greater. It was at that moment that I understood that spirituality is not escapism, but an expansion of consciousness. It is not about denying pain, but going through it with a different mindset. And that is how my morning became a journey of reconnection, purpose, and listening. Because when we silence the noise of the world, what remains is presence. After he left, the silence was deafening. Not the usual silence, the kind you get when the house is empty or everyone has gone to bed. It was a deep, internal silence that cannot be filled with sound. A kind of emptiness that echoes inside, even when there are voices around. My father's absence wasn't just that of a body no longer present. It was as if the axis of our family had been shifted. And as the days continued to pass, something inside me insisted that he wasn't completely gone. It was hard to explain. It wasn't a rational hope, but it wasn't an illusion either. It was a constant feeling, as if he were still there, just somewhere else, invisible to the eyes, but completely perceptible to the heart. Sometimes I would be distracted, doing something trivial, and out of nowhere, that thought would come, that shiver, that gentle presence, that only those who have felt it know what I'm talking about. A presence that doesn't scream, but fills the room like a breeze that you can't see, but feel. I spent a lot of time trying to silence this, convincing myself that it was just longing. But longing, in itself, doesn't carry much clarity. Longing doesn't speak to us in the silence of the early morning. It doesn't bring answers to questions you didn't even know you were asking. The hidden truth behind all this is that when someone leaves, the bond may change shape, but it doesn't break. And understanding this led me to a transformation that I would never have achieved if I had just moved on without questioning, without listening to what the invisible was trying to show me. It's funny how pain forces us to see the world differently. It's as if suddenly the surface wasn't enough anymore. You start to understand the backstage of life, what happens behind emotions, behind coincidences, behind chance encounters. I started to notice patterns, signs, little messages camouflaged in the routine, an object that changed places without explanation, a perfume that appeared out of nowhere without anyone else noticing it, a song that played exactly at the moment I was about to give up. Was it all imagination? I asked myself this many times, but the impact of these experiences was real. They changed my emotional state. They brought me peace, direction, courage to continue. And that's when I realized something important. When grief meets spirituality, a new way of living is born. It's no longer about absence, but about presence in another dimension. Pain doesn't disappear, but it becomes a bridge between the visible and the invisible, between what we were and what we can become. And this space of transition is where true transformation lies, because when we accept that there is something beyond what meets the eye, our mindset expands. We stop looking for exact answers and start to welcome the signs, the mysteries, the moments that pass through us and teach us, even without a logical explanation. This search for answers led me to study more, listen to other stories, and talk to people who had also experienced something similar. And in almost all the stories, there was one thing in common: the certainty that that loved one was still present in some way. Sometimes as a guide, other times as a sign of strength, other times as a reminder that love is greater than any physical limit. When you open your heart to this, you begin to understand that bonds don't end. They just change, and in some cases become even stronger. This certainty, even if subtle, changes everything. It changes decisions. It changes what you prioritize. It changes the way you look at other people's pain. Empathy increases, the rush decreases, the heart becomes more attentive, and little by little, without realizing it, you start to live in a different way, more conscious, more connected, more whole. That's what happened to me, a change from the inside out, a silent but profound reconstruction of my way of being in the world. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because it was at that moment when everything seemed normal that something out of the ordinary happened. There was no premonition, no preparation, not even an expectation that something mystical might manifest. It was a night like so many others. I had just gone to bed, my body tired, my mind still trying to slow down from the worries of the day. And then, everything changed. Time seemed to slow down. The air became dense, as if something invisible filled the room. My eyes were closed, but I felt it. You know that feeling that someone is nearby, watching? It wasn't scary. On the contrary, it was a serene, familiar presence. And then I saw it. It was him, my father. Not as a hazy memory, not as a shadowy figure, but with a clarity that took my breath away. He stood there, as steady as ever, his face calm but intense. The light around him didn't come from a lamp. It was a soft glow that seemed to come from within him, as if love itself were emitting light. My heart raced, and for a moment I thought I was dreaming. But inside me something screamed, "This is happening." There was no hug, no long words. He just looked at me, with that look I had known since I was a child. A look that said everything without having to say much. There was strength, there was peace, but there was also a kind of urgency. And then he said, "It's up to you now. Take care of the family." That was it, but that was enough. Those words pierced me as if they carried invisible layers of meaning. It wasn't just a request, it was a surrender, a call, as if he were transferring something sacred. At that moment, I understood that it wasn't about longing, nor just any old visit. It was a communication with a purpose. It was as if life was telling me, from now on, you carry a mission. In the days that followed, everything felt different. I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time, a renewed energy but also a weight, the kind of responsibility that isn't imposed from the outside but comes from within. I began to see my own journey in a different light. Decisions that had previously seemed trivial began to have greater meaning. I understood that each choice I made would impact not only my path, but that of everyone around me. It was at this point that I began to reflect on the nature of spiritual encounters. Are they hallucinations produced by longing? Are they constructions of the unconscious trying to console us? Or is there really a subtle field, a parallel dimension where these reunions occur not as illusions, but as truths that we still cannot explain with logic? I asked myself all these questions, but deep down, the answer was not in the books. It was in the impact, because there are experiences that touch us so deeply that they simply cannot be ignored. And this impact cannot be measured with arguments. It is measured in transformation. I became a different person after that night, more sensitive, more present, more committed to what really matters. And even though I still miss him, it no longer carries the same weight. It now has meaning. It is as if each memory of him was also a reminder of who I am becoming. The truth is that there are encounters that cannot be explained. They can only be experienced. And when they happen, they bring more than answers. They bring direction. And perhaps that is the true sign, when something out of the ordinary happens and you feel that, from that moment on, you can no longer live the same way. You have been marked by something greater. Because that sentence, "Now it's up to you. Take care of our family," wasn't just a request. It didn't sound like simple advice coming from someone who was gone. It was a call, a code, a moment that divided my life into two, before and after the message. As he said it, there was an intense calm on his face. It wasn't sadness nor farewell, it was surrender. It was as if he trusted that I was ready, even if I wasn't yet sure of that inside me. As if he knew something that I couldn't see yet, but that I would soon understand. At that moment, time stopped. His image seemed to float between what was a dream and what was real. But inside me, everything was absolutely true. And after he left again, gently, as if he wasn't leaving but just moving away a little, the phrase stayed. It stayed alive. It kept repeating inside my mind like a constant beat. Take care of our family. In the days that followed, I didn't know exactly what to do with it. Life doesn't hand us an instruction manual when we receive this kind of spiritual mission. But something started to move in me. Small changes, small impulses that I would have ignored before. I started to pay attention to details that had previously gone unnoticed. a gesture of affection that I had neglected to make, a word that I had not said when I could have. And I realized that taking care of my family wasn't about great heroic acts. It was about presence, about offering what is most rare these days, time and listening. This message took me out of autopilot. It put me in a place of awareness that I had never been in before. It was as if my mindset was being reprogrammed, as if with every act of caring, I was somehow honoring his presence. And the more I did this, the more connected I felt to him, to myself, and to what really matters. I began to understand that mission, when it comes from this place, is not a burden. It is direction. True transformation happens when the purpose stops being something distant and theoretical and starts to be felt in practice, in everyday life, in the small choices that carry meaning. That sentence became my starting point for a new journey. A journey that required me to review priorities, make difficult decisions, and give up certain distractions to delve deeper into relationships. I realized how often we distance ourselves from the people we love without realizing it because of routine, rushing, or not listening. And the impact of this is silent. We only realize it when we have already created miles of emotional distance. But his message came to wake me up. And perhaps now that I share it with you, it is also fulfilling another function, touching someone who needed to remember that the essential thing is in the closest relationships, that the hidden truth of our mission is not always in success or external performance, but in caring for that which sustains everything: affection, connection, love. When he said, "Take care of our family," he wasn't just talking about our blood structure. He was talking about the connections that build our inner foundation. Family can also be made up of people who lift us up, who walk with us, who recognize us beyond our appearance. Taking care of this is a conscious choice. It is a daily, invisible, but deeply necessary task. This was the biggest revelation for me. Sometimes our spiritual mission is not in great deeds, but in what happens inside our homes, behind the scenes of life, where few applaud, but where everything really begins. It was there that I understood the weight and beauty of that message, and that is why it continues to resonate within me, as a constant reminder of who I am, and who he still is, even though he is no longer physically here. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because after that night, something changed in the way I perceived the world around me. It wasn't one of those moments where you get emotional and then everything goes back to normal. It was different, as if a new frequency had been activated within me, as if, from that experience onwards, I began to tune into signals that had always been present, but that I had simply ignored before. And that's when something began that still moves me every time I tell it. The day after the meeting, I woke up earlier than usual. It was still dark, and a soft silence filled the house. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and on the way, I passed the bookshelf in the living room, the same one where my father always organized everything his way. It was then that I noticed something out of place. An old photograph had fallen to the floor. There was no way that photo could have slipped on its own. It was protected by glass, framed, positioned safely. And yet there it was, lying face up, showing a simple and powerful moment. The two of us, sitting in the backyard, smiling. It was as if he were saying, "I'm still here." Later that day, I got in my car to leave, and as I turned on the radio, a song started playing. But it wasn't just any song. It was the one he always listened to when he was driving. An old song, the kind that's rarely played anymore, but has the power to pull you into a time that seems untouched. The melody, the lyrics, the moment, it all seemed too aligned to be just a coincidence. It felt like a beckoning, a response, a silent signal saying, "You're on the right path." And then something even more subtle happened. More than once that week, I caught a whiff of something in the air. Not just any scent, but the very scent he was wearing. And it wasn't in a place where it could logically be present. It was a clean, unmistakable scent that would come out of nowhere and then disappear, like a passing moment from someone who just wanted to say, "I've come to see you." These signs kept piling up, and no matter how much reason tried to find explanations, wind, chance, memories activated by the subconscious, There was something in the impact of each of these experiences that completely escaped logic. It was as if, through these small details, he was guiding me, reaffirming the mission he had entrusted to me. It was as if he were saying, without words, "Keep going. You are not alone." And this made me realize a truth that we often ignore. Not every miracle shouts. Some whisper. They manifest themselves behind the scenes of routine, between the lines of daily events. And only those who are willing to listen with their heart hear them. Spirituality does not invade. It invites. And those who accept this invitation begin to realize that reality is much broader than we can touch. I began to write down these occurrences. I began to observe them more closely, as if mapping an invisible journey. And it was curious how, as I internally validated these signs, the more they appeared. It was as if my openness created a bridge between two worlds. And the more aware I became of this, the clearer I felt that there was a dialogue going on, even without words. This realization changed my sense of presence. I learned to pay more attention to the little things. The tone of people's voices, the synchronicity of encounters, the repetition of symbols, and even feelings that arise out of nowhere, because sometimes the spiritual manifests itself first in the emotional, and what you feel for no reason may actually be a coded message. These signs don't just bring me comfort, they guide me. They are spiritual compasses. And deep down, I believe that we all have access to this, but we need to silence the noise to hear what is essential. We need to get out of automatic mode, breathe with more presence, accept that there are revelations that do not come through concrete evidence, but through experiences that transform. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because as subjective as all of this may seem, there is a spiritual and even philosophical basis for these experiences. What I experienced, and what so many other people also report, is not just the fruit of nostalgia or imagination. Within various spiritual traditions around the world, these encounters with departed loved ones are recognized, studied, and even expected at certain moments in the human journey. In Spiritism, for example, Allan Kardec called these manifestations spiritual visits. According to him, the spirit retains its individuality after death and can, with divine permission or through vibrational affinity, manifest itself to incarnate people, especially in moments of pain, transition, or mission. The message almost always carries purpose, guidance, or consolation. It is as if there were a possible bridge between worlds, and this bridge was activated by the power of love and connection that remains, even beyond matter. In Christianity, there are similar stories. Many biblical passages speak of angels, prophetic dreams, voices, and apparitions that manifest themselves at critical moments in someone's history. And although some try to separate these episodes from our current experiences, the truth is that they share the same root, the idea that God can use invisible channels to touch us, warn us, prepare us. Jesus himself, after his resurrection, appeared to the disciples in moments of extreme confusion and fear, bringing peace and meaning where there was emptiness. In Buddhism, we talk about the veils that separate the physical from the spiritual plane, and how these veils become thinner when we are open, aware, and sensitive to the impermanence of life. In shamanism, ancestors are an active presence, spiritual guides who walk alongside the living, offering wisdom through signs, dreams, visions, and rituals. In other words, what we call a sign or coincidence may, for other cultures, be a clear language, a natural communication between dimensions. And all of this shows us a hidden but powerful truth. The visible world is only a part of reality. There is a subtle, energetic, spiritual dimension, and it is in constant dialogue with ours. Most people do not perceive this dialogue because they have learned to silence their own sensitivity. They have been taught to believe only in what can be measured, weighed, or proven. But life goes far beyond what meets the eye. And that is why, when someone has an experience like this, it leaves a mark, transforms, and completely changes the person's mindset. The presence I felt from my father, the words he said to me, the signs that came afterward, all of this is perfectly aligned with what these teachings reveal. that the spirit is still alive, conscious, interested, and more than that, that it can act, it can guide, protect, inspire, and that we, here, even though limited by matter, are capable of perceiving and interacting with this invisible world if we are truly open. There are also researchers in consciousness and instrumental transcommunication who have been trying to capture these contacts through audio, video, and electronic recordings for decades. Some of the results are impressive and point to something that defies traditional explanation. But the strongest point is not just in the technological evidence, but in the impact that these experiences have on people. Because where there is transformation, there is truth. And it is no coincidence that throughout history, the moments of greatest pain and collapse have also generated the greatest spiritual encounters. When the ground disappears, when control is lost, when logic fails to respond, that is when the invisible presents itself, as if to say, now you are ready to hear what could not be said before. That is why, more and more, I realize that these visits are not exceptions, but invitations. Invitations to look within, to reconnect with our roots, to remember who we are and what really matters. They come to wake us up, to align us, to return us to our essence. Because after everything I had experienced, the encounter, the message, the signs, the spiritual echoes that repeated themselves in silence, something inside me was completely reconfigured. It wasn't a change that came from outside. It was as if, inside, a new version of me had awakened. I began to see life with different eyes. And I don't mean this poetically. I mean it in the most real and practical sense of the word. It was as if everything had gained another layer of meaning, the little things that had previously gone unnoticed, a gesture of affection, a sincere conversation, even a moment of silence with a loved one, now had weight. And not a negative weight, but a value, an emotional impact that made me slow down, be present, pay attention. Before, I was always running after goals, answers, objectives that I barely understood. It was as if I was on existential autopilot, trying to compensate for voids that didn't always have a name. But after that contact with my father, after the clear feeling that he was still there, guiding me, entrusting me with a mission, everything changed. My decisions began to come from another place, a more intimate place, more connected to something that I couldn't name before, but that I now recognize as spiritual direction. That's when I understood that transformation doesn't just happen when you learn something new, but when you start to feel something new. And I felt it. I felt that there was a greater intelligence guiding my steps, putting the right people in the right places, opening unexpected paths, and sometimes closing doors that, on impulse, I would try to keep open. This taught me to trust, to let go of control, even if little by little, and surrender to a rhythm of life more aligned with the truth, my truth. And in this new state of consciousness, other things began to reveal themselves. I realized how distant I had been from myself before, how I had stopped listening to my intuition, honoring my feelings, noticing the signs that were already present but that I ignored because my mind was always busy and distracted. I began to meditate more often, to walk in silence, to write, to watch more than to talk. And it was in this space of stillness that the greatest insights emerged, not as ready-made ideas, but as internal, subtle revelations that made sense even without a logical explanation. My relationships with people have also changed. I have become more empathetic and patient. Because when you understand that each person is going through an invisible battle, and that we are all affected by pain and connections that go far beyond what we can see, it becomes harder to judge. You start to act with more compassion, more truth, more presence. And this transforms relationships, even those that seem distant or difficult. The most curious thing is that the more I took care of what was around me, my family, my friends, my energy, the more I felt his presence with me, as if that care were in itself a living prayer, a kind of gratitude in motion, a concrete way of keeping alive the bond that, even after death, remains strong. This journey has taught me that spirituality is not a distant concept. It is in your daily decisions, in the way you choose to react, position yourself, create. It is in the choice to forgive, to listen, to be whole in a conversation, to not run away from your feelings. Because all of this aligns you with something greater. And when you align, you listen. And when you listen, you understand. Today I carry this certainty within me. There is something greater guiding us. Not in the sense that everything is predestined, but in the sense that there is a loving, subtle intelligence that guides us, if we are willing to feel it. And this feeling has brought me a peace I had never known, a serenity that does not depend on control, but on surrender, a clarity that does not come from the mind, but from the heart. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because after everything I've shared so far, perhaps a question is arising within you. What if this happens to me? What if at some point, a presence, a vivid memory, a subtle sign touches your soul in a way you can't explain? How will you react? Will you ignore it? Will you doubt it? Or will you listen with your heart? I ask you this not to make you doubt, but to invite you to reflect on an essential point. Are you open to signs? Many people think that these spiritual encounters are privileges for special people, but the truth is that they are not. They are not about merit, but about sensitivity. Being open to signs does not mean forcing a connection or creating fantasies. It means silencing the noise from outside to listen to what is already inside. It means giving space for the soul to breathe. And for that, there is no magic formula. There is presence. There is listening. There is surrender. It starts with something simple but profound: intention. When you declare internally that you are ready to perceive, feel, understand what previously went unnoticed, something starts to move. It's as if the universe reorganizes certain frequencies around you just so that you can capture what has always been there, but that you haven't yet been able to translate. Sometimes it comes through a dream. Other times, it comes through a sudden memory, a song that plays at the exact moment, a chill that comes for no reason, or a sudden peace in the midst of chaos. But for all this to be possible, we need to slow down. And this is perhaps the greatest challenge of modern life. Because rushing makes us blind. Anxiety makes us deaf. Distraction disconnects us from what is essential. That is why creating moments of pause is not a luxury. It is spiritual survival. It could be a short 5-minute meditation. It could be a sincere prayer before bed. It could be a walk without a cell phone, just observing nature. What matters is not the form, but the intention behind it. What matters is your inner willingness to reconnect with the invisible. Over time, you will realize that these moments of silence hold more answers than 1,000 questions thrown to the wind. You begin to develop a sensitivity that cannot be taught in books. It is like a vision that opens up from within. You begin to feel when something is real, even if you cannot explain it. And it is at this point that the spiritual ceases to be theory and becomes practice. It ceases to be belief and becomes experience. This sensitivity also changes the way you see others. You start to notice hidden pain in people's eyes. You start to recognize when someone is trying to appear strong but is falling apart inside. You start to sense that certain encounters were not by chance. It's as if a silent wisdom begins to whisper truths that the world has taught you to ignore. And yes, sometimes this opening can be scary too, because when the veil lifts, even just a little, we realize how much we were asleep. But this awareness is the beginning of something new. It is the door to a more authentic journey, more connected, more alive. And when you go through this door, there is no way to go back to who you were, because now you know, now you feel, now you hear. And if you've made it this far, maybe that door is already opened for you. Maybe this video isn't just content. It's a mirror, a reminder, an answer to something you've been feeling for a long time, but still didn't know how to name. So I ask you again, with love and truth, what if that happens to you? Will you be ready? Because after everything I've lived, everything I've felt and shared, one thing has become clear to me. My father didn't come back to scare me. He came back to remind me who I am. Not who I was, but who I was destined to become. He didn't come to bring pain, but to give me direction. And it's curious how, in moments like these, that time stops. Everything that was urgent dissolves. Everything that seemed big shrinks. And what really matters appears with almost sacred clarity. It's as if faced with such a true spiritual presence, the soul finds its origin, and with it, its responsibility. That night became a turning point in my journey, because I understood that life is not only about what we experience, but about what we leave behind in others. My father did not really leave. He expanded. He became a presence in the details, a voice in our conscience, a strength when everything else falters, and most importantly, a reminder that there is something much greater guiding us, and that this greater something manifests itself in subtle ways, sometimes in a dream, sometimes in a sign, but always with a purpose. As the days went by, I began to realize the real impact that this experience had on me. I began to live with more intention. I began to seek more truth in relationships, more listening in meetings, more presence in my routines. The transformation that I sought outside began to blossom within, and it was then that I understood. Sometimes, spiritual awakening does not happen in temples or mountains. It happens in the living room, in the silence of the early morning, in the moment when the invisible touches the visible, and you know without needing proof that you are not alone. This awareness brought me lightness, but also responsibility, because now that I know, I can no longer pretend I didn't see it. And maybe that's why I'm here telling you all this, because just as he reminded me of who I am, I feel I need to do the same with whoever is ready to listen, to pass on what I received, to make this chain continue, because there is someone on the other side who might need this confirmation right now, this word, this breath of faith. The truth is that life has a backstory. It doesn't just happen on the surface. There is a bigger movement behind everything, and when you connect with it, things start to make sense. You understand why certain people went through your story, why some pain was necessary, why some new beginnings came after the chaos. Everything fits together, not logically, but spiritually. And when this happens, you change. Your mindset expands. Your decisions gain new weight. You begin to realize the value of time, of listening, of touch, of the unspoken word. You begin to understand that each choice carries an energy, a reflection, an impact, and that living consciously is deep down the most beautiful way to honor those who have passed away. Because when you live truthfully, you keep alive the essence of those who left a legacy in you. If I am here today, it is because I understood that my pain needed to become a bridge, that my experience needed to become a message, that my reunion needed to become a light for other journeys. And deep down, I think that is what we all came here to do. Remind each other of what we should never have forgotten, that we are guided, that we are loved, that we are part of something much bigger. Please also leave a like if you felt a connection with this story. This shows that we are building something worthwhile and helps this message reach those who are also seeking this type of encounter, meaning, and spiritual care.